I wasn't looking for anything important. That's the part people don't believe. I was just trying to clear space. Dad had been gone for 6 months by then, and the house still smelled like him. Old paper, aftershave, and the faint dust of things that hadn't moved in years. I told myself I was ready. That cleaning his study would bring closure. It didn't. His desk sat against the window, exactly where he'd left it. Nothing fancy. Scratched wood. One stubborn drawer that always stuck. I opened the top drawers first. Receipts. Expired warranties. Notes written in Dad's uneven handwriting. Half reminders, half thoughts he never finished. Normal things. Safe things. Then I pulled on the bottom drawer. It resisted. Harder than the others. I tugged again, annoyed now, and it finally gave way with a sharp sound that made my chest tighten. Inside was a single manila envelope. No label. No dust. Like it had been touched recently. Or deliberately kept clean. I told myself to put it back. That whatever was inside was private. But my hands were already opening it. The first thing I saw was the letterhead. County Records. My stomach tightened. I pulled the document out slowly, like it might disappear if I moved too fast. It was a property deed. Original. Stamped. Not a copy. I scanned the page, confused at first, then cold. The address was familiar. Too familiar. A plot of land just outside town. The one everyone said Dad had sold years ago. The one that supposedly helped settle debts after Mom passed. The land my stepmother and her sons talked about like it was long gone. My eyes moved to the valuation. $320,000. I sat down hard in Dad's chair. Because according to this deed, the land was never sold. Not legally. Not fully. Not by him. And my name, my full name, was printed at the bottom. As beneficiary. I stared at it, heart pounding, trying to remember every conversation I'd ever had about that land. It was handled. There's nothing left. Your father wanted it that way. That's what they told me. That's what I believed. I closed the envelope slowly. Because suddenly, a thought settled in that made my hands shake worse than grief ever had. If this deed was real, then someone had lied. And if they lied about this, what else had they decided I didn't need to know? The story about the land had always been simple. Too simple. Dad bought it when I was a kid. I remembered riding out there with him once, kicking dust, watching him stand quietly like he was imagining something the rest of us couldn't see. This is for later, he'd said. Later never came. At least, that's what they told me. After Mom died, everything became about practicality. Bills. Stress. Decisions made quickly and explained slowly, if at all. It had to be sold, my stepmother Karen said more than once. Your father couldn't keep up with the taxes. Her sons nodded along. It helped keep the house, one of them added once, like he'd rehearsed it. No numbers were ever mentioned. No paperwork was ever shown. Just that same phrase, repeated whenever I asked questions. It's already been handled. When Dad's health declined, the story hardened. Don't bring it up. Don't upset him. Don't reopen old decisions. I learned to stop asking. That's what families train you to do when questions make them uncomfortable. Sitting there in Dad's chair, deed in my lap, those memories felt different. Sharper. I noticed things I hadn't questioned before. Like how Karen had always changed the subject whenever land or money came up. How her sons spoke about inheritance, as if decisions had already been made. How Dad went quiet whenever the property was mentioned. Never angry, just distant. I flipped through the deed again. There were dates. Recent ones. Not from years ago. From less than 18 months before Dad died. That didn't match the story. At all. I pulled out my phone and searched the address. The plot was still listed. Vacant. No record of sale. No transfer. My chest tightened. If the land hadn't been sold, then where did the money story come from? And why was everyone so committed to it? I remembered a conversation from years back, one I'd dismissed at the time. Dad, sitting at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. "They think I don't notice things," he'd said quietly. I'd laughed it off. "Who?" He shook his head. "Never mind." At the time, I thought he meant his health. Now, I wasn't so sure. I carefully put the deed back into the envelope and slid it into my bag. Not out of fear. Out of instinct. Because whatever this was, it wasn't meant to be found casually. And the more I thought about it, the more one thing became clear. If the land was still legally his, then someone had been speaking for him. Making decisions. Telling stories. Closing doors. And they'd been doing it confidently, because they thought no one would ever check. That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed every conversation about the land, every time I'd been told to let it go. Not because it was gone, but because it was dangerous. And now that I had proof in my hands, I had to decide what kind of daughter I was going to be. The kind who accepts the version handed to her, or the kind who asks why the truth needed to be buried in the first place. I didn't confront anyone right away. Not Karen. Not her sons. Not even my aunt, who always seemed to know more than she said. Because once you ask a question out loud, you can't take it back. So I did what Dad always did when something didn't sit right. I checked the details. The next morning, I drove to the county records office. It was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of place where time moves slowly and secrets sit comfortably behind file cabinets. I slid the deed across the counter. The clerk adjusted her glasses and typed for a long time. Then she frowned. "This property was never sold," she said. I felt my stomach drop, even though I'd expected it. "There was an attempted transaction," she continued. "But it was never completed. The transfer was flagged." "Flagged how?" I asked. She lowered her voice. "Missing authorization." Missing authorization. Dad's authorization. Someone had tried to sell land that wasn't fully theirs to sell. I thanked her and stepped outside, blinking in the sunlight like I'd surfaced from underwater. The story they'd told me, that the land was sold years ago to keep everything afloat, wasn't just misleading. It was false. On purpose. I drove past the plot on my way home. Nothing had changed. Tall grass. Faded fence posts. The same stretch of quiet Dad had once stood in, imagining a future that never got its chance. Except now, I understood something I hadn't before. The land wasn't forgotten. It was frozen. Held in place while someone decided when, and how, to benefit from it. That afternoon, I called an attorney. Not to accuse. To understand. After reviewing the deed, she leaned back in her chair. "You're listed as contingent beneficiary," she said. "That means if your father didn't finalize a sale, the property interest defaults to you." "And if someone tried to sell it anyway?" I asked. Her expression hardened. "That's a problem. A serious one." I drove home in silence. Memories replayed themselves with new meaning. Karen insisting on managing Dad's finances when his health declined. Her sons suddenly taking interest in real estate and investments. The way paperwork always seemed to vanish before I could look at it. They hadn't sold the land. They'd been waiting. Waiting for Dad to pass. Waiting for the moment when no one could challenge the signatures. Waiting for me to stay quiet. And for a long time I had. That evening, Karen called me. "I heard you went to the county office," she said lightly. My grip tightened on the phone. "Why would you hear that?" I asked. A pause. "I just worry," she said. "You've been through a lot. Digging up old things can be confusing." Confusing. I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "I'm not confused," I said. "I'm informed." The line went quiet. I thought we agreed the land was handled, she said carefully. We agreed to a story, I replied. Not the truth. She hung up without another word. That's when I knew. They weren't surprised I'd found out. They were surprised I didn't back down. I stood in Dad's study that night, looking at the desk again. The drawer no longer felt stubborn. It felt deliberate. A place he'd chosen because he knew, eventually, I'd open it. And I understood something then that made my chest ache more than grief ever had. Dad didn't leave me instructions. He left me proof. Because he knew exactly who would need it. After Karen hung up on me, the house felt different. Not quieter. Heavier. Like the walls had learned something and were waiting to see what I'd do with it. I didn't call her back. I didn't explain myself. I didn't reassure anyone. Silence can be unsettling when people are used to controlling the narrative. Over the next few days, that silence traveled. Karen stopped calling altogether. Her sons suddenly became polite. Too polite. My aunt texted me things like, "Hope you're okay," without asking what was wrong. Everyone knew something had shifted. No one wanted to be the first to say it out loud. At Sunday dinner, the tension was thick enough to taste. Karen hosted, like she always did. Same roast. Same seating. Same forced normalcy. But no one mentioned the land. That was new. They avoided the subject so carefully it became the only thing in the room. I watched Karen closely. She laughed too loud. Refilled glasses too often. Hovered whenever someone mentioned Dad's name. At one point, her older son leaned toward me and said quietly, "You're not planning to make this messy, are you?" I met his eyes. Messy for who? He didn't answer. Later, Karen cornered me near the sink. "You need to understand something," she said in a low voice. "Your father trusted me." "I know," I replied. "That's why this is so disappointing." Her face tightened. "We did what was necessary," she said. "You weren't ready to deal with things back then." That sentence landed harder than she expected. Because it wasn't about land. It was about control. "You decided that for me," I said calmly. "And you kept deciding it." Her voice dropped. "You're opening doors you can't close." I nodded. That's usually what truth does. She walked away from me then. Not angry. Afraid. That's when I realized something important. They still believed they could manage this. Explain it away. Delay it. Pressure me into backing off. They thought I wanted a fight. I didn't. I wanted clarity. The next morning, I met with my attorney again. We filed formal notice. No confrontation. No accusations. Just documentation. A request to freeze any attempted sale. A declaration of interest. A paper trail they couldn't talk their way around. By afternoon, Karen called. Her voice was different now. Controlled. Careful. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Because Dad couldn't," I said. She sighed. "This is going to hurt people." I thought about that. About who had already been hurt. Who had been kept in the dark. Who had been told to stay quiet for the sake of peace. "It already did," I replied. "Just not the people you're worried about." That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from fear. From anticipation. Because once paperwork is filed, time starts moving in only one direction. And I knew what was coming next. They would have to choose. Come clean. Or double down. People almost always choose the second option first. Karen didn't call it a confrontation. She called it a conversation. "We should all sit down," she said over the phone, her voice practiced and calm. "There's been a lot of misunderstanding." Misunderstanding. That word again. The one people use when they want to soften intent. We met at her house 3 days later. Everyone was there. Karen. Her 2 sons. My aunt. And me. No lawyers. No raised voices. Just a living room arranged like nothing important was about to happen. Karen opened with a sigh. Your father didn't want conflict, she said. Everything we did was to keep the family together. I nodded slowly. Then let's be clear. I placed a folder on the coffee table. The room went quiet. Inside were copies. County records. The flagged transaction. The deed. Not accusations. Facts. This land was never sold, I said. An attempt was made. It failed. And Dad never signed off on it. Her younger son leaned forward. That's not how we remember it. I'm sure, I replied. Memories are flexible. Records aren't. Karen folded her hands. Your father was sick. He asked me to handle things. I believe that, I said. What I don't believe is that he asked you to lie. Her mouth tightened. This money, her older son began. It was never money, I interrupted. It was land. And it was never yours. The room shifted then. Not dramatically, but unmistakably. Because I wasn't emotional. I wasn't pleading. I wasn't asking for permission. I was stating reality. Karen looked at me for a long moment. What do you want? There it was. Not the truth. Not resolution. Control, translated into a question. I want Dad's wishes respected, I said. And I want the story corrected. My aunt spoke for the first time. Why didn't you tell her? She asked Karen quietly. Karen didn't answer. She couldn't. Because saying it out loud would have exposed what this really was. A long delay. A quiet gamble. A plan built on the assumption that I wouldn't look too closely. Her sons shifted uncomfortably. You're making this bigger than it needs to be, one of them said. I met his gaze. You made it big when you decided I wouldn't notice. Silence. Heavy. Final. Karen finally stood. We'll need time to respond. I gathered my folder. Take all the time you need. The paperwork's already filed. Her confidence cracked just slightly. Not fear. Calculation. Because she knew now that this wasn't about family discussions anymore. It was about accountability. I left without another word. As I drove away, my hands shook. Not from doubt, but from release. Because the hardest part wasn't standing up to them. It was realizing I'd never been included in the truth because it was inconvenient. And inconvenience, I'd learned, was often just another name for exclusion. The response didn't come right away. That didn't surprise me. People who believe they're in control always assume time is on their side. 2 weeks passed. Then 3. Karen didn't call. Her sons didn't text. Family gatherings were suddenly postponed for scheduling reasons. But behind the silence, things were moving. Because paperwork doesn't wait for feelings. My attorney called first. They've retained counsel, she said. They're asking for mediation. Mediation. That word told me everything. Not denial. Not outrage. Negotiation. Which meant they knew they were cornered. At the mediation session, Karen looked smaller. Not physically. Emotionally. The confidence she once carried like armor was gone, replaced with tight smiles and careful phrasing. Their lawyer spoke a lot. About intentions. About misunderstandings. About grief. Mine didn't interrupt. She waited. Then she slid one document across the table. A signed statement from Dad's physician. A note Dad had dictated less than a year before he died, affirming his mental clarity and explicitly refusing the sale of the land without my consent. Karen's lawyer stopped talking. The room went very still. That note, Karen said weakly, was never meant to be used like this. I leaned forward for the first time that day. It was meant to protect me, I said. Which should have told you something. The mediation ended quickly after that. Not with shouting. Not with tears. With agreement. The land would be transferred fully into my name. Any claim of prior sale would be withdrawn. All future proceeds, if I chose to sell, would belong solely to me. They didn't apologize. I didn't ask them to. Because apologies offered under pressure aren't apologies. They're strategies. A month later, the title was officially transferred. I stood on the land for the first time in years, the wind moving through tall grass, the sky wide and indifferent. Nothing about it looked like $320,000. It looked like possibility. Karen didn't come to the final signing. Her sons didn't either. They sent their signatures through representatives. Distance was easier than accountability. That evening, my aunt called me. "I didn't know," she said quietly. "I really didn't." "I know," I replied, because she sounded like someone who truly hadn't. And that mattered. I went home and placed the deed, not in a drawer, but in a fireproof safe. Not hidden. Protected. For the first time since Dad died, I felt something settle in my chest. Not closure. Alignment. Because justice doesn't always look like punishment. Sometimes, it looks like reclaiming what was paused. And deciding what comes next, on your own terms. I didn't sell the land right away. Everyone assumed I would. $320,000 has a way of making people imagine solutions they were never invited to plan. But every time I stood there, alone, listening to the wind move through the grass, I felt Dad's presence more clearly than I ever had in the house. He didn't buy it to flip. He didn't buy it to leverage. He bought it because he believed in leaving space. Space to decide. Space to grow. Space to choose a future without someone standing over you telling you what's practical. That's what he left me. Not just property. Permission. The family changed after that. Karen moved on quickly, socially at least. New routines. New circles. A carefully edited version of the past where everything worked out. Her sons stopped speaking to me entirely. That hurt more than I expected. Not because I missed them. Because it confirmed something I'd suspected for a long time. They'd never seen me as family. Just as an obstacle that hadn't noticed itself yet. My aunt stayed. She asked questions now. Listened. Told stories about Dad I'd never heard before. Ones where he worried about me. Ones where he planned quietly. He always said you'd figure things out, she told me once. That you didn't need noise to understand people. I smiled at that. Because it sounded exactly like him. I eventually did sell the land. Not because I needed to. Because I was ready. I used part of the money to pay off the house Dad left behind. Part of it to build a future I chose. Not one inherited through silence. And the rest. I kept untouched for a while. Just to remind myself that security doesn't always arrive when you're looking for it. Sometimes it waits until you're strong enough to hold it without asking permission. When I think back to that desk drawer now, I don't think of betrayal first. I think of intention. Dad didn't confront anyone. He didn't leave instructions that would start a war. He left proof. He trusted that someday, I'd open the right drawer, ask the right questions, and finish what he couldn't. They thought the land was gone. They thought the story was settled. They were wrong. Because some legacies aren't loud. They're patient. And they wait for the one person who was paying attention. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.